Excel 2007, prepare to print and distribute your workbooks. We're going to take a look at the various page layout tools and techniques. There's the ability to add headers. You can set a print area. You can have certain items print on every single page. So we'll talk about all these various tricks and how you can insert comments and really clean up your document and get it ready to distribute, whether that be actually printing and distributing by paper or saving it out to a file server or sending it in an email. Let's fix up our expense report, get it ready for printing, and to just simply email out to whoever needs a copy. We're here on the Home tab. We are in Normal View. We can go into Page Layout View if we'd like to see how it's going to actually look. If we print it out, notice that we don't have any headers here. We could always click to add a header. By doing that, we're in this whole new area, Header and Footer Tools. We've got a design ribbon. Just to show you, if we were in regular old Normal View, we could also go to our Insert ribbon and choose Header and Footer from here. And that does the same thing by bumping us back into Page Layout View. This design ribbon is only available for us when we're in our Header and Footer tools. What do we have available? Of course, we could type in any bit of text that we wanted to type. This is Andrew's expense report, Andrew's expenses. When I click outside of it, I see what that looks like. If I wanted to, I could make it a little bit larger, change the font, anything that I want. If I click back here, I'm still in my header. Now what do I want? I can add the current date. Notice here it says ampersand date within square brackets. That's just a symbol for date. If I click outside, I do see the date. When I click in my header, I see the code to find today's current date. If I click over here on the right, if I'd like, I can put the current time in there. I can go to my footer area. Perhaps down here, I'd like to show the file path. This is the ampersand path and ampersand the name of the file. This is coding it so that even if I move this source file at some point in time, the header, when I finally print it, that header will actually update to the proper location. I love putting file paths in the footer or the header so that when I print out a document and I realize I need to make a change to it, I know how to get back into that file as quickly as possible. Instead of really just looking all over all of my drives, I'll know exactly where to go to. Now, that's a pretty long path, so probably don't want it there for the sake of this exercise, but in the real world, it's good to have that. I can click here again to add the footer, and I'll add either a simple page number, or if I know I have a document that has a number of pages, this will show how many pages are in the document, and then I can do page number of number of pages. So this is 1 of 1, but if I had 15 pages, this would say whatever page I was on. Maybe I'm on page 1, maybe page 2, and this ampersand pages is always going to keep count of the number of pages that I have. So 2 of 15, 3 of 15, if I had a 15-page spreadsheet. From here, I can do a couple more things. The name of the sheet, it's just simply going to go and show that. Or I could even insert a picture. Maybe not in the footer, but wouldn't that be nice in the header to put my company logo so it's printed out at the top of a spreadsheet? Just so you see how to do it when you insert the picture, it really does throw you into your dialog box where you can open the file. You just simply navigate through your file structure, select it, and then click Insert, and you'll have that picture in your footer. Well, we've made our headers and footers look pretty good. Again, you click on them, you can go back in here and make some different choices. Maybe I'd like these to scale with the document or align with my page margins, different odd and even pages. Maybe on my even pages, I want it to say Andrew's expenses, and on my odd pages, I want it to say not Andrew's expenses. This is something that's more natural when you're printing a Word document, but you still have these functions when you're in Excel. Let's move on now to the Page Layout tab. You're probably familiar with margins. If you've worked in any software program before, this is where you get to select how much non-printable area is going to be on this page. We've got our normal setup, our wide, and our narrow. I do want to point out, in Excel, of course, you can determine how far your header is going to print from the edge of the page versus how far the rest of your document is going to print from the rest of the page. You can, of course, go into custom margins. This is a dialog box that's been around for years and years, and now it's been incorporated into Excel 2007. Here you could get down into specifics regarding your margins. You could also choose, if I had a very small type of spreadsheet, maybe I want that spreadsheet, that information to be centered horizontally and vertically on that page. Maybe I want it right smack dab in the middle instead of too far to the left or too far to the top. I'll leave it the way it is. I want to show you that you also have these other items that we'll take a look at from the ribbon, but I want to point out in this dialog box, you can still go into your headers and footers. If this is the way you're used to, perhaps from a previous version of Excel, you can certainly come in here and do your custom headers and footers with all these same buttons. We have the same tools here. They're just laid out in a different way. On our Page tab, this is where you can choose Portrait or Landscape if you want to scale your document, what type of paper you're printing to, and the print quality. And you also have this Sheet tab, which is something very interesting, and we're going to spend some time on this notion here shortly. I'm going to click OK just to point out that everything in that dialog box, which by the way you can get by clicking that button as well, is here. Our orientation, portrait versus landscape. Portrait doesn't make sense for our expense report. We want to print it so that we have more width available on the paper than height. We have size. What type of paper are we printing this out to? Of course, you have to have the right type of paper in your printer for this to work. We're fine with letter. Print area we're going to come back to in just a moment. Here's the scale to fit area. Right now we've got width, 1 page, height, 1 page, and that makes sense for us. Have you ever printed an Excel spreadsheet and gotten it all wrong because you printed the majority of it on page 1, but then there was just one silly little column that couldn't fit on page 1, and so it printed out on page 2, and you had to tape it together or you had to reprint it? Well, you can help that not to happen by working with the scaling, the width, and the height. You could make it so that you really shrink it down so the width is 1 page, and you might want to, if you have so much data that if you shrink it to 1 page and 1 height, you can't, or 1 page high, you can't read it. So here's where your flexibility is. You might want to give it more pages as far as how many will print out. That's what height dictates. Width is across from left to right. We have scaling grayed out here because I have a very small document. It's only 1 page, so it's not necessary to scale this to fit the page. We'll move over here to Sheet Options. We aren't viewing grid lines. If I put a check in View, now I can see all the grid lines. Those normally don't print, but if you wanted them to print, you'd put a check mark here. I like it the way it was. The headings have to do with our cell addresses. Now we see cell, column, A, B, C, row 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice when I remove the check, those are gone. I can bring them back. And maybe for some reason it makes sense for those headings to print when I actually print this document. So you'd make sure you have a check mark there if you did want the column headers and the row headers to print. Let's move on back here to the print area. You can set or clear a print area. It used to be with Excel that it would print every single cell in your whole entire spreadsheet whether or not there was text in there. That was crazy. So you had to set the print area to make sure that you didn't print out, 65,000 pages based off of those cells. It's not the same now. Excel pretty much figures out your range. If you have data in cells, it figures that's what should be printed. But if you have a very complex workbook and you don't want everything to be printed because some of it is workspace where you calculate, or you have different pieces of information used as the source for your calculations, but you don't want it to print, then setting the print area might be the answer that you've been looking for. So in my situation, my print area, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can see what to select. I just want to print out this as my print area. So I select my cells, I go to print area, and I choose set print area. Now, that's all that's going to print. If I had more information down here, it would not print. Only this information is what's going to print. So you select your cells, you choose set print area. Then if I realized I needed more information in then I could just make another selection and choose Add to Print Area or Clear Print Area. Breaks. This is how you can add page breaks. Maybe I have a breaking point and it makes sense that I need to put a page break in there. Then I can just simply click where I want that page break to go and choose Insert Page Break. And it actually did that. It broke the page apart for me. I can go back and remove the page break so I don't have that break right there anymore. This is something that has to make sense with the document that you're trying to print. I can also reset all page breaks if I knew there was some crazy stuff that I'd added in there. If I want to see my page breaks, I can go to View and choose Page Break Preview. And this is saying, hey, here's a hint. You can always click and drag and adjust your page breaks. I can choose OK, and notice I could actually adjust that. Now I've got 2 pages that are going to print. Well, that doesn't make sense in my document, but it's pretty nice because you can finally in Excel see the orientation of what's going to print and click and drag and make it make sense visually to you before you waste all that paper. I'll go back to page layout, and we're on the page layout ribbon as well. Print titles is something that I find extremely helpful when I'm in a multi-page document. In fact, let's open up a multi-page document. I'm going to grab memberships here, and I have tons and tons and tons of pages. If I go to my page layout view, I can see page 1 of 9. Well, I have my headers and items right here. I want this to be visible on every single page because it's not going to make sense if I were just to print out a page that looked like this. I might not really know, well, what's the last name? What's the first name? Is this the business phone? Is this the home phone? What's this date have to do with anything? So that's where this print titles comes in. This indicates what should print at the top of every single page. Rows to print at the top. I want the first row to print at the top. Notice it's an absolute reference from row 1 to what row 1. Maybe I'd want the first 2 rows to print at the top. Rows to repeat at the top. In other words, it's like freezing panes when you're in your spreadsheet, but here it's determining that I always want my headers to print at the top of every single page. Maybe I would have some row headers that would make sense for a column to repeat at the left because that column is the header for every row. Not in this scenario, but you might have that scenario. Just moving along with this dialog box, I want to point out you can also set your print area here, and this is where we had the grid lines if you wanted them to print. And your page order is something interesting also. In a multi-page document that spans more of the window than you can see from left to right, do you want it to print down all the columns and then come back up and print down, or do you want it to print over from left to right until it gets to the end of the range and then come back over and print? So this just has to do with the orientation of your data and how you want your pages to print. I'll choose OK, and now we've set our print titles. The only thing left in this area is the background. You could really have a graphic that repeated in the background over and over and over again. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, this is not a good idea. And you're right, I can toggle that off. I could go back and I could select something that would be a little bit more appropriate than a tiled fish. Perhaps some sort of watermark that says confidential. You could put that in the background. I'd recommend for the most part, if you're adding a background, that would be for the type of document you're not printing, but rather something that you're distributing. Unless, of course, it's a picture that says confidential in the background. But if that's the case, you might want to insert something like a picture here instead of just as the background. We're almost ready to print it. Before we do that, though, we should run a spell check. On the Review tab is where you access your spell check. Of course, you can press F7 to run that on the keyboard also. We have something new, though. We have the Research area. We could search for specific items, and we could look it up actually in reference books, maybe in a thesaurus, maybe in an encyclopedia, maybe on MSN Search or even MSN Stock Quotes. Look at that, Thomson Gale Company Profiles if you're researching some firm that exists out there.